You know, there's that old cliche, right? The one that says, the eyes are the window to the soul. Mm-hmm.
But honestly, I think that's totally outdated. If you really want to understand a generation, really get into the wiring of their brain, how they tick, you shouldn't look at their eyes. You should look at their bookshelf.
That's a much better metric. Yeah. A bookshelf isn't just, a list of books you've read. It's a map. It maps out your anxieties, your values, and what you think a hero even looks like today.
Exactly. It's the soul's data set. And today, we're doing a deep dive into a very specific stack of 11 books. Now, these are not just like random bestsellers. Our source material, and it comes from a millennial professor, a YA author who spent years observing this group, says these are the 11 titles that basically decode the Gen Z experience.
And we should probably define that, right? We're not just talking about teenagers here. This demographic, it goes from high school all the way up to people turning 30 this year. It's a huge slice of the population. Right. And the whole vibe is just different. We know they grew up online, that's a given, but the source points to something more nuanced. They are obsessed with changing the world, but they also have this radical honesty about how broken it all is.
That's the tension right there. They aren't looking for stories that pretend everything's okay. They want stories that say, yeah, this is a mess, so what are we going to do about it?
So our mission today is to decode these 11 books and figure out the why mythology, why this trauma-dumping humor. Yeah. What does it all tell us about the people we live and work with?
And a good place to start is with their fantasy touchstone. Every generation has one. And the source makes this really critical distinction. For millennials, the big one was a boy wizard.
Harry Potter.
Right. But for Gen Z, it's not a wizard. It's a demigod.
And we are talking, of course, about A Lightning Thief, the whole Percy Jackson series by Rick Riordan.
Exactly. I mean, if you were born in the late 90s, early 2000s, this wasn't just a book. It was like a whole cultural framework. On the surface, it looks like a standard chosen one story. Percy Jackson finds out his dad is Poseidon. He goes to Camp Half-Blood. He fights monsters. Standard stuff.
But, and this is where it gets really interesting, the reason why he's a hero is completely flipped from something like Harry Potter.
That is the key insight.
Yeah.
Yes. In Harry Potter, you're special because you have magic. You're special because you're better. In Percy Jackson, the things that make you struggle in the real world, they're the very things that make you a warrior.
Let's unpack that a little. So Percy has ADHD and dyslexia. In a classroom, those are problems. They're deficits.
Right. But Riordan just completely reframes them in the book, The Dyslexia.
Yeah.
It's because his brain is hardwired for ancient Greek, not for English. It's a different operating system.
Yeah.
And the ADHD isn't an inability to focus. It's his battlefield reflexes. He's hyper-aware because he has to be ready to fight a minotaur at any moment.
I love that so much. It's validating neurodivergence as a superpower, not a problem.
It is. And the source mentions how this series just fueled years of free reading periods. It created this world where feeling different was actually the prerequisite for saving the world. It told a whole generation, you don't have to fix your brain, you just have to find the right battlefield.
That is such a powerful message to grow up with. But of course, Gen Z didn't stay at Camp Half-Blood forever. They grew up, and as they got older, their taste in mythology got, well, a lot darker.
They moved from the adventure of myth to the tragedy of it. Which brings us straight to The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller.
Oh, this book. If you've spent any time on Book Talk, you know this book. It creates a very specific physical reaction.
Tears. Lots and lots of tears.
Sobbing, yeah. It's a retelling of the Iliad, but it's really focused on the romance between Achilles and Patroclus.
It is. But think about that shift. Percy Jackson is all about winning. The Song of Achilles is a tragedy. You know how it ends. It does not end well. But the source sees this as a natural progression. The generation moved from just learning the myths to really feeling the myths.
So why do you think that particular tragedy resonates so much? Why not a happy ending?
Because it feels more authentic. The source points out that you see quotes from this book tattooed on people. I would know him in death at the end of the world. It's intense. It speaks to this desire for raw, real emotion over some kind of sanitized happiness. Love is epic, even if, or maybe because it ends in devastation.
It's validating the big feelings. It's saying your grief is as epic as a Greek tragedy.
Precisely. And that idea of questioning the happy ending or the good guy, that runs through this whole list. We see in the graphic novel Pick 2, Nimona by N.D. Stevenson.
Yes, great inclusion. It bridges that gap to visual storytelling, which is huge. And has a totally different vibe from the Greek myths.
It does. It's about a shapeshifter, Nimona, and a quote-unquote villain named Blackheart. and they're trying to expose the corruption of the so-called heroes.
So it flips the script again. The knight in shining armor is actually the bad guy.
Right. And the source highlights how this appeals to older Gen Z because of that anti-corruption narrative. It asks the very 2020s question, is the institution you serve actually good?
Plus, it's known for its strong queer vibes.
Yes. It's subversive, but it's also really accessible. You can read it in one sitting. It's funny, it's sweet. But underneath it all, it's asking you to question the system.
Okay, so let's recap. We've got this baseline where neurodivergence is a strength, tragedy is valid, and institutions are probably corrupt. Now let's pivot to the books that are maybe the hardest for an outsider like a parent or a boss to really get. The very online books.
We are now entering the world of my first book by Honor Levy.
Even that title feels like a bit of a meme, my first book.
It's very meta. It's a short story collection, but the source argues this is the definitive text for the internet brain. It captures the slang, the fragmentation, the dopamine-fried attention span of a life lived online.
The source actually said that if you're a millennial, you might need to use a search engine just to understand the acronyms.
And that's a feature, not a bug. It works as a shibboleth.
A shibboleth.
Yeah, a kind of code word. It tells you who's in the group and who's out. If you get the references in a story called Internet Girl, you're part of the tribe. You get it.
And if you don't, you're just a tourist.
Exactly. It's reflecting a life that's hyper-aware, a little detached, and always sort of performing its own sadness for an audience. It's like reading a Twitter feed that gained consciousness.
That sounds exhausting, but also, yeah, incredibly accurate. But not every book is about being trapped online. There's also this huge anxiety about that in-between phase. You know, when you're technically an adult, but you feel like a kid in a trench coat.
I think everyone feels that, but this list has a specific title for it. Martyr by Kavi Akbar.
Right, and this is a heavy one. We should clarify, this is adult fiction, not YA.
That's a key distinction, yeah. The main character, Cyrus, he's a post-grad. And he's dealing with this profound grief. His mom died when he was young. His dad died while he was in college. So he's just unmoored, totally. He's using art and poetry to try and find some meaning in it all. And the source calls it a quick read, which again speaks to that desire for high-impact stories, for a shorter attention span. But the real connection is that feeling of having all the credentials of adulthood, but no idea who you are.
It's the quarter-life crisis in book form.
But with higher stakes. The world feels more volatile. And speaking of volatility, we have to talk about red, white, and royal blue.
Oh, this book was everywhere. Just massive. But again, people get this one wrong. It's not a book for teenagers, is it?
Correct. The source is clear. It's an adult romance. It appeals to teens, for sure. But the characters are adults with adult problems. You have the president's son falling for an English prince.
A classic enemies to lovers story.
It is, but look at the context. It's not will they kiss. It's will this cause an international incident. It deals with being outed on a global stage. It mirrors that reality for older Gen Z, navigating relationships with real-world political consequences.
It's a fairy tale, but one that knows about polling numbers and PR strategy.
Exactly. It's a fantasy where love can actually conquer the system, which is a nice, hopeful counterpoint to the cynicism in, say, Nimona.
So we've got the demigods, the internet brain, the messy politics of being an adult. But there's another theme that felt sharper, heavier, this idea of radical honesty.
This is where the generation really separates itself. They do not sweep things under the rug. They put the rug through the heavy-duty wash cycle.
And the poster child for this has to be Jeanette McCurdy's memoir, I'm Glad My Mom Died.
I mean, just that title. It stops you in your tracks. You see that on a shelf, you have to pick it up.
It's brutal. And McCurdy, she's a millennial from iCarly, so there's this huge nostalgia hook. Gen Z grew up watching her. But the book is not a fun, behind-the-scenes look at kids' TV.
Not at all. The source says the nostalgia gets them in the door, but the trauma-dumping humor keeps them reading.
Okay, break that down for me. Trauma-dumping humor. That sounds like a contradiction.
It's a coping mechanism. It's being able to talk about just horrific things, abuse from her mother, eating disorders, with this dry, almost meme-like wit. The cover is her holding a pink urn and smirking.
It's deeply uncomfortable.
And that's the point. It validates the idea that you can love your family and also be destroyed by them. And you're allowed to say that out loud. That resonates so deeply with a generation that puts mental health above, traditional family loyalty.
And that willingness to confront the ugly stuff, it extends beyond family. It goes into the streets. We have to talk about The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas.
This is what the source calls the social mirror. And you have to remember the context. Gen Z came of age during the rise of Black Lives Matter. They saw police violence happening on their phones in real time.
So this book gave them a vocabulary for what they were seeing.
Exactly. It follows Star, a teenager who sees her unarmed friend shot by police. But the insight isn't just the trauma. It's about what happens after. It's about code switching between her fancy prep school and her neighborhood.
And the pressure to become an activist.
Yes. It shows that political action isn't always a choice. Sometimes it's a survival mechanism. It bridges that gap between personal trauma and public action.
There's one more in this social mirror category that takes a really different tack. Yellow Face by R.F. Kuang.
This one is a satire, and it is biting. It goes after the publishing industry itself.
The premise is just wild. A white writer steals a manuscript from her Asian rival, who has just died in a freak accident, and she publishes it as her own.
It sounds like a thriller, but it's really a dark comedy about cultural appropriation.
Yeah.
Who owns a story? Who gets to tell it? The source mentions it was a Reese Witherspoon pick, so it has broad appeal, but at its core, it's using that same trauma-dumping humor.
It lets you laugh at the absurdity of it all while still seeing how messed up it is.
It seems to be the delivery system for the heaviest topics. Abuse, racism, corruption. If you can make it a satire, if you can meme it, you can process it. It's a defense against despair.
Speaking of things that hurt, let's talk about stakes. Looking at this list, the stakes are almost never low. It's always life or death.
High stakes and a ticking clock. That's the final pattern. And it starts with a mystery. One of Us is Lying by Karen M. McManus.
The source called this the Breakfast Club with a dash of murder.
Which is a perfect hook. You've got the setup, 4 students in detention, the jock, the princess, the criminal, the brain. But then one student dies, peanut oil in his water, anaphylactic shock, and the other 4 are suddenly murder suspects.
But think about how different that is from the Breakfast Club. In that movie, detention bonds them. They walk out as friends.
Right. In this book, detention divides them. The tension is all about suspicion. The source says this highlights a generational trust issue. They do have to lean on each other eventually, but it's not a given. It's about surviving a brutal social world where everyone has a secret.
High school is a survival game.
Exactly. And if we want the ultimate ticking clock and the ultimate challenge to the happy ending, we have to end with They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera.
I love this one. The title is the biggest spoiler in history.
It literally tells you the ending.
And it's still a massive bestseller. People read it knowing what's coming.
The premise is this. In this world, a company called Deathcast calls you on the day you're going to die. You get about a 24-hour warning.
So 2 boys, Mateo and Rufus, they both get the call. They're strangers. They meet on an app for people on their end day, and they decide to spend their last hours together.
And they fall in love. Swiftly,
yeah.
intensely. But here is the profound philosophical shift. Gen Z is often called cynical, but this book shows they are deeply romantic. They've just redefined what a successful relationship is.
Because they die. There's no loophole. The title is not a trick.
They die. But the book asks, is a relationship only good if you grow old together? Or is it enough to truly, authentically connect with someone, even if it's just for one day?
That is. Wow, that's a heavy question for a YA novel.
It is. But it goes back to that radical honesty. This generation knows the world is unstable. They know time isn't guaranteed. So they value the intensity of a moment over the promise of longevity.
That really puts the whole bookshelf in perspective. From Percy Jackson turning deficits into strengths, to Nimona questioning the good guys, to memoirs exposing trauma.
And if you put it all together, you see a generation that demands representation, warts and all. They don't care about the line between genre and literary fiction. They just care about the truth.
They aren't looking for escapism that pretends the house isn't on fire.
No. They want escapism that says the house is on fire. Here's how we find love and humor while the flames are rising.
So, for you listening, if you're trying to understand the Gen Zers in your life, your employees, your students, your kids, reading these books isn't just for fun.
No, think of it as cultural fluency. You're learning their vocabulary. You're learning what they value. These books are the shorthand for the demographic that is reshaping our culture right now.
It's like learning a language, but instead of verbs, you're learning empathy and memes.
Exactly. You are learning to see a world where the ending might be scary, but the story is still worth telling.
So here's a thought I want to leave you with. We talked about they both die at the end. This idea that a happy ending isn't about length, but about authenticity. If this generation is operating on a timeline where forever isn't the goal, but real is, How does that change how we should lead them or mentor them or even just talk to them tomorrow?
It's the question worth asking.
Thanks for diving in with us. We'll see you on the next one.